And touching on that, so let me give you a two-part question to comment on. First, were you surprised by the degree to which the Iranian regime lashed out at the UAE? And then, as a corollary to that, I was that surprised me. Um, Although in retrospect, maybe it shouldn't have, given that the UAE had become so central to the Abraham Accords and had developed such a close relationship with Israel. But what also surprised me was the UAE's defensive performance. That I had not realized that the UAE, with allied help, with U.S. help and other allied help, had developed the defensive capabilities and capacity to essentially block the shot on for the vast majority of those attacks. Could you comment on that? But then could you also comment on pivoting from what you just said, talked about essentially I think what you're talking about is the need to build a new coalition of countries that have a common interest in countering the threat and in keeping global commerce flowing, especially through the important choke points. And so we're talking, for example, about allied countries such as South Korea and Japan, who have some significant naval capacity, or maybe some of the European countries that have some significant naval capacity that maybe could be mobilized in that kind of thing. What kind of can you talk about some of the countries or the kinds of characteristics that they would be able to bring to a coalition like that?
Yeah. First off, I would say that I was not surprised at what Iran did. In fact, prior to the commencement of hostilities, I was talking to a group and was asked if Iran is attacked, what will they do?
Mm,
And my reaction was they're going to hit the Gulf states
mm,
because they can. And it's easier to strike back at them than it is to they can't necessarily reach us. Yes, they hit our base in Bahrain, and they went after some of our installations, but there was no question in my mind that that was going to be in the cards. And I think that we just have to accept that fact that that under the current regime, Iran will go after our friends and partners in the region. So I think that that's a reality in my mind. The fact that the UAE was so effective is because I think as a country, they made the right types of investments,
mm,
uh, and I think that as we look to uh, Ukraine for what they've been able to do against Russian aggression, I think we should look at UAE and say, you know, what decisions did they make? What systems did they decide to acquire? And again, in building out greater capability in the region, use that as perhaps a template. And all of us could do better on what we've purchased and how we've gone about countering some of these threats. But I think we need to do that. I also would say that with respect to other countries that are dependent on some of these, what I'll call critical geographic areas, whether it's the Persian Gulf or the Red Sea or the South China Sea, is again to recognize that we're living in a different time, that we are dealing with new ways of war, and we have to begin collectively to look at what is it that is needed for an international coalition to be able to come together to conduct the types of operations that are there. Now, this was happening in the Persian Gulf today is a very, very high end of warfare. But if you recall, during the height of the pirate activity in the Somali basin, we had countries coming together that were bringing capabilities, and
right,
we were able to deal with it.
right.
Um, that it's on a completely different plane of conflict, but I think that we need to, look to the future, work with our friends and partners and say, how will we deal with a situation similar to this? And then move quickly to build the types of capabilities that we need. And if I'm pointing at another country, I'm also pointing fingers back at us, that we need to be able to do the same thing, and accept the fact that in the world we live in, we better be prepared for contingencies of the future.
There are a lot of people, Admiral. There's been a debate for a few years now about from folks, national security, um, in the national security community, uh, uh, the debate between uh, trying to focus on have a plan for a posture for be prepared to respond to crises in all of the major regions, strategic regions. And then there's been a counter argument that says, no, 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 we should prioritize, and we should not be distracted by less strategically significant theaters and focus just on what matters most to the U.S. Even down to, there's been the idea bandied about, you sort of kicked around, that of potentially reorganizing the unified commands,
Mhm.
the geographic unified commands, so that we would have essentially a Western Hemisphere command, we would have an Indo-Pacific command, and then everything in between would be sort of in one command and would be a lower priority than the other two. Do you and then there's been a lot of debate in the back and forth as President Trump and his administration have formulated a strategy
Mhm.
and a campaign plan vis-a-vis Iran. There have been a lot of critics to say that's a distraction from the more important interests that the United States has, and there's an opportunity cost to it from the Pacific problem and the Western Hemisphere problem for the United States. Do you see it that way, or how would you weigh in on that debate?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. One, I've long been a proponent that we have to be able to uh, deal with two major problems at the same time. The idea of a two theater force is what we need. And I honestly believe that, because I do think that as we look at, and what's happening today is a perfect case in point, that regardless of what may be thought about U.S. dependencies on the Gulf, the fact of the matter is that the Gulf is strategically and economically important globally. And so I think that you know we've wanted to leave the Middle East for a long time, but I just think that the imperative um, of what the Middle East represents and produces is something that we just have to accept. The other area in my mind is in Asia, and particularly the Western Pacific, because of the sea lanes, because of the commerce that moves in that part of the world. Uh, we can't relinquish that to someone else to say, we're no longer interested. So I think those are the two areas that are going to continue to be hugely consequential for security and prosperity, at least for the foreseeable future. And so I think we need to think in those terms. I would also argue that we need to take a good look at the map, and perhaps not do away with some of the combatant commanders, but I think some of the regions could be drawn a little differently. And I do believe that what we should do is to take a look at Eurasia writ large,
Hmm.
which encompasses the two areas that I just highlighted: the Gulf region, the Middle East, and the Western Pacific. But we also have another war going on in Eurasia, and that's Ukraine. And to really take a look at that and look at the forces that are in play, look at the players that are in play, you know, the axis of disruption, or whatever you want to call it, and say, how do we deal with this environment in this area of the world? the homeland is absolutely important, and our ability to defend the homeland. But the the global interest really, you can't discount Eurasia, and the two areas of Eurasia that I think are so economically significant are the Middle East and Asia. And so I would kind of, if you gave me a map and a magic marker, I might draw some different lines, but I think that we just have to accept the fact that our economy, prosperity, and security is not divorced from those two regions.
Yeah, I mean, sort of case in point, when North Korean soldiers showed up on the front lines in Ukraine in one of the more bizarre episodes that we've seen in contemporary military history.